Again, no late game execution.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Syracuse basketball against their most hated rival, Georgetown. I can't even say they still suck because they were the better team this afternoon. The Orange lose on their home floor, 75-71. I'm Jackson Holzer. This is Locked On Syracuse. Thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. And we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Folks, just like Notre Dame, the late game execution for Syracuse really needs to be dissected. It's like we all need to go back to 8th grade, go back to biology, and it's like we're dissecting a frog, which, fun fact, I've never actually dissected anything for whatever reason in my education. I got a pretty good education. Never dissected anything, unlike a lot of people. Not complaining necessarily, just a weird thing. But the late game execution for this team against actual competition, not mid-major, no, Power 4, Power 5 teams, late in games, they just can't execute for one reason or another. Texas A&M, or excuse me, Texas Tech, not A&M, Texas Tech, Notre Dame, and now Georgetown. So we'll talk about that on this post-game reaction. The transition defense. Don't even get me started. Actually, I will get started in the second segment of this post-game reaction. And then third, these two programs are heading in two different directions. There's one program that looks like it's headed on the come up. They're still not where they need to be, but they look a lot better than they used to. Well, it's not really that hard for them. But there's another team, spoiler alert, it's ours, Syracuse. Most of you guys are watching are probably Syracuse fans. We're not trending in the right direction. So that's what we're going to go over on this post-game reaction podcast. Before we get to everything, this episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. I don't know about you guys, but I realized fairly quickly that this game was going to come down to the final couple of minutes. I thought it in the first half, especially because the game was tied after the first half, 37-37. And then after the first few minutes of the second half, I knew that basically nothing mattered until the final couple minutes of the game, because for one way or another, this game was going to be close, which it was. And it was Georgetown, it pains me to say this, it was Georgetown that made the plays to win. And it was Syracuse once again not executing down the stretch. Syracuse basketball does not make a basket for the final 4+ minutes of the game. I believe it was Jaquan Carlos's corner three-pointer. That was the last field goal the Orange made the entire game. Oof. A team in Syracuse that was dominating Georgetown inside. That was their whole offense. Donnie Freeman, Jyare Davis, Eddie Lampkin inside. That was it. And you know what? It was working. And like I said against Albany, that needs to be the team's identity. Keep doing that. Play inside. But for the final couple of minutes, they decide, no, let's shoot some three-pointers. How about that? Are you kidding me? Let's go to the 150 mark in this game. There's 1 minute and 50 seconds left, and Syracuse is down by 3 points. They're down by 3. Now, most of you guys who are watching or listening are astute in basketball knowledge. If you have the ball and you are down 3 points with 150 to go, do you need to panic and take three-pointers? No, you don't. You can keep playing basically the same way you have been playing the entire game, but the Orange decided, no, we need a three-pointer. I mean, I'll unload on coaching for a second here with the substitutions. I mean, Chris Bell was put on the floor late in the game. Oh, but Jackson, you need a three-pointer. Don't you need Chris Bell? He can't shoot anymore. Chris Bell is a complete liability. He can't be on the floor. 0-3 from three-point this afternoon. He can't shoot. He hasn't shot all season. He's put on the floor for Jyare Davis, who was dominating inside. Jyare Davis had 15 points on only 8 field goal attempts, and he played 24 minutes. How is it that Jyare Davis played 24 minutes and Chris Bell played 23 minutes? Really? It should be 35 minutes, Jyare Davis, 5 minutes for Chris Bell, if he's lucky. But no, he played 23, and he was in the game in the final 2 minutes because Syracuse needs a three-pointer. They don't need a three. But they put Chris Bell in for Jyare Davis anyway. What it should have been was Davis, Donnie Freeman, and Eddie Lampkin down the stretch. That's what they needed to do. By the way, Eddie Lampkin just no looks inside at the end of the game. Okay, sure, fine. I mean, he was only Syracuse's best player this afternoon. 18 points on 8 of 12 field goals, played 36 minutes. But sure, don't get him looks inside when he's just killing them down low. Okay, fine. That's cool. So what was the offense for the Orange late in the game? They're down by 3 with 1:50 to go. Well, they already screwed up the personnel that's on the floor. Thank you, Coach Autry and the rest of your coaching staff. Their offensive possession is a complete dud. There's ball movement. It's Carlos. It's Choppa. It's Donnie. Donnie's at the top of the key. But nobody's moving. It's just stagnant. What are we doing here, fellas? I mean, come on. You can't come up with something better than what they were doing? It was a 3-man game, just moving the ball around. I appreciate the ball movement, but you got to actually move without the ball to get an open look. Otherwise, the Georgetown defense can just set its feet and just let you move, which is exactly what they did. And they forced Choppa Moore late in the shot clock to take a deep right wing contested 3. Did it go in? No. The only thing they got right is if they were going to take a 3, which they didn't even need, Choppa Moore is the guy who I would want shooting the 3. But you need a better play than what they ran. How about go inside, which had been working? And a little bit of it has to be placed on Donnie because Donnie had a good look. Donnie needs to turn around. But maybe a coach should probably tell him that. Maybe, just maybe. Then on the next offensive possession, here's really where I need to get on Donnie Freeman. He just decides to play hero ball. Why is he taking a right wing 3 early in the shot clock? There's still well over a minute left in the game. It makes no sense. It's like their basketball IQ just goes out the window. What was working in the afternoon? Syracuse basketball was dominating inside. The points in the paint don't really reflect it because in the next segment, we'll talk about the transition points, the fast break points. But Syracuse basketball scored 34 points in the paint. They scored 71 for the game, but they dominated in free throw attempts. They didn't really make a whole lot of free throws. They were 21 of 29, which is 72%. That's a whole nother story. We won't talk about it because it's not egregious. But part of the reason why they don't have as many points in the paint is because they made 21 free throws and had 29 free throw attempts. Their offense came from the paint, and you're down 3 points with 1:50 to go. And your first play, well, it's really not a play. So Choppa Moore just has to chuck up a late right wing 3. That didn't go in. Of course it didn't go in. And then the next possession, Donnie Freeman, I don't know what he's doing, just decides to play hero ball. It's poor late game execution. It's simple as that. And that's why this team, in a back and forth game against a hated rival, in a game where, look, we can talk about the Georgetown and Syracuse rivalry and how it's not the same as what it once was. It clearly isn't. But I was getting into it. I think most of you guys were getting into it too. Especially in that second half with the whole Lucas Taylor and the other guy on Georgetown getting double technicals and Choppa Moore being a little physical. we were getting into it felt a little bit like the past, which I am not really old enough to remember or experience. But it certainly felt that way. Felt a little bit different, just a little glimpse of what it once was. But Georgetown executed better down the stretch, and they win in Syracuse's building for the first time since 2016. Ooh, that doesn't feel very good, does it? 75-71 is the final this afternoon. I'm Jackson Holzer. This is Locked On Syracuse, and I'm giving you guys my post-game reaction to this game. Coming up, not the late game execution. We just talked about it, but coming up, the transition defense. If you're watching this, you just saw me shake my head for the past few seconds. It was terrible, and that's what's coming up next on the Locked On Syracuse podcast. Basketball season is in full swing, and whether it's the NBA, college, Syracuse, even though they lost, the game was actually pretty exciting. And hey, I also managed that the tickets are going to get a little cheaper now that they're not very good. But the way I get tickets for games is by using Gametime. Gametime is a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. My favorite feature is the curated deals. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. I'm Jackson Holzer. This is Locked On Syracuse, and this is a post-game reaction podcast to the Orange's 75-71 loss to Georgetown this afternoon inside the Dome. We just went over the late game execution, which was not very good. Just not good at all. But now let's talk about transition defense. There was a moment in this game where Georgetown in the second half took an 8-point lead. It was their largest lead of the game, 8 points. And Kevin Brown, the broadcaster of the game, he literally called out, "Where's the Syracuse defense?" It was off a turnover, which is, you don't want to turn the ball over on offense, obviously. But sometimes there are possessions where you turn it over, there's someone on Georgetown already streaking down the floor, and there's nothing you can do. But on this particular instance, which gave Georgetown an 8-point lead, its largest of the game, they had plenty of time to get back. You can go watch the play over again. It was with, I think, less than 12 minutes to go in the game, somewhere in that range. Just find where Syracuse was trailing by 8 points at one point in the second half. It was right then and there. They had plenty of time to get back on defense. But only one guy gets back, and it leads to an easy layup. And that's why Kevin Brown had to say, "Where's the Syracuse defense?" It was all game long. Georgetown had 19 fast break points compared to 5 for just Syracuse. That's why Georgetown killed Syracuse technically by statistics in the paint. They had 48 paint points, but 19 of them came on the fast break. I don't remember them hitting a fast break 3 or a transition 3. It was all inside the paint. And also it's misleading because I told you the free throw numbers. Syracuse controlled the paint. But the reason why Georgetown won the paint battle is because of the transition defense, which was non-existent. And I'm going to give Coach Autry a little bit of a break here. I just hammered him in the last segment for the late game execution because that really does boil down sometimes to coaching. Awareness, IQ, knowing what to do, knowing what plays to run. That's coaching. But in this particular instance, at halftime, the broadcast said it. Adrian Autry was telling his guys, you got to get back on defense. It's that saying where a coach can only lead a horse to water, right? If I have a horse, I can only lead the horse to water. I can't force the horse to drink. And Coach Autry is telling him, you got to get back on defense. What's he supposed? Message not received, clearly. Very rarely do I do something like this where I ask the question, who wants it more? Most of the time, it's because, or really the reason why I don't usually do this is because I feel like it's a lazy take to ask like, who wants it more? Or the winner of this game is going to be who wants it more. No, most of the time, the winner of a game is determined by who executes, which in this case, late game execution. That's what it came to. It wasn't late game effort. Late game execution is what ultimately decided the game, right? But in terms of getting back on defense in transition off a turnover, that's energy and effort. That's where you can really ask, well, who wants it more? And I have no doubt in my mind that Syracuse basketball wanted to win this game badly. You can tell. They showed fight. They showed effort. They were trying. I appreciate it. There's just one problem. You tried the second most on the court. There was a team who gave just a little bit more effort than you did, because your team did not get back on defense in transition. Georgetown, 19-5 in fast break points. You're not going to win many games like that. I thought their half-court defense, honestly, for Syracuse in this game, wasn't terrible, especially in that second half when it looked like they were kind of pulling away a little bit. At one point, the Orange turned an 8-point deficit into a 6-point lead. It was their half-court defense that was terrific. I mean, Jyare Davis and Lucas Taylor, they were dogs out there. But you wanted it the second most when it came to getting back on defense. That's the problem. What more do you want me to say? What more do you want me to say? Because I'm at a loss for words. And again, I'm kind of giving Coach Autry a break because what's he supposed to do? Tell him to not get back on defense? I mean, he's telling them to get back on defense. They weren't. 19-5. When the broadcaster has to say, where's the Syracuse defense? Kevin Brown, by the way, is a Syracuse alum. Now, he's neutral when he calls these games. Totally. He does an excellent job. He was fair. He's unbiased. If you didn't know that, you probably wouldn't have had a clue that he's a Syracuse alum. But he is. And even he's saying, where's the Syracuse defense in transition? It was bad. I have nothing else to say regarding the late game execution and the transition defense. So coming up, two different directions. There's one program that's trending a little bit upward, and there's another, I think we all know which one's which, that's trending downward. That's what's coming up next on the Locked On Syracuse podcast. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Syracuse football, speaking of them, they're playing in the Holiday Bowl against Washington State on December 27th. FanDuel now houses the Orange as 7.5-point favorites. I think it's in large part because Kyle McCord announced that he's going to be playing in the bowl game. You can do what you want with that information, but Syracuse is over a touchdown, 7.5-point underdog against Washington State. It's not over a touchdown. That would be 8.5. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. I'm Jackson Holzer. This is Locked On Syracuse, and this is a post-game reaction podcast to the Orange's 75-71 loss to Georgetown on their home floor this afternoon. These two programs are heading in two different directions, as I have been teasing throughout the show. Coming into today, I looked up the net rankings for these teams. Georgetown, 97. Syracuse, 136. To put 136 into perspective, here were some of the teams that are ranked ahead of the Orange before this game. UNC, Greensboro. Not the North Carolina Tar Heels. No. UNC Greensboro. Seattle. Not the Seattle Seahawks. This isn't football. I'm talking about the College of Seattle. Seattle is ranked ahead of them in the net rankings. Northeastern. Purdue. Fort Wayne. No, not the Purdue Boilermakers. They are certainly ahead of Syracuse in the net rankings. No, it's Purdue Fort Wayne. Rice. Troy. ETSU. These are teams that were ahead of the Orange in the net rankings coming into today. Seriously? Look, not every win or loss is a reflection of a program. But today, I feel like we saw one team in Georgetown that's more on the come up. And to be honest with you, they're not starting off from the basement. They're starting off from the bottom of the iceberg because they've won 4 conference games in the last 3 years. But you know what? This was their first Power 5 victory of this season. They now have 8 wins in total this season. They're certainly a better team. They have a lot more talent than they used to. Are they a tournament team this year? Probably not. But you know what? They're better. And with Ed Cooley in charge in his second season, if I'm a Georgetown fan, which I'm not, obviously, I would be pretty excited about where the program is going. They might not ever get back to what it once was. But they could be a pretty formidable team next year or the year after. They're trending upward. They're getting better. Meanwhile, Syracuse, we know this by now. I mean, they're 5-5 this year. That's not good. They're trending down. And they've put themselves in a position where they have to basically be perfect down the stretch. Forget down the stretch. For the final 2/3 of the year, because we're already basically a third into the season, they got to basically be perfect. They're 5-5. None of their wins have come against Power 5 competition. The Albany win was the most impressive win, which they played terrible defense in, but hey, at least they scored a lot, so they won, and I praised them for a dominating win. It was a dominating win. Here's the deal. Folks, you've made it this far into the podcast. You're watching it, you're listening to it. You might be someone that is a very loyal listener or watcher of this podcast. And for that, I say thank you. Or maybe this could be one of your first few times checking out this podcast, and you really want to get a good feel for my style. And to that, I also welcome you. And I will be here for every Syracuse basketball game. I don't care how good or bad they are. But here's what I want to tell you. Do you know what the most popular podcast on this channel is? It was just recent. It was my reaction to this Tennessee debacle where they just got completely annihilated and they didn't look like they belonged on the floor. That was a couple of weeks ago. Now, Syracuse got a dominating win against Albany. And, well, the ratings, they weren't that great for it. Here's the deal, guys. I am a Syracuse fan, and I'm a Syracuse alum, and I don't hide it. I love this team. I bleed orange. I would rather this team win every game and I get no ratings on the podcast than them lose games like this or get blown out against Tennessee or can't execute late against Notre Dame or any other team for that matter and get a bajillion ratings. I care so much. And it's just a shame. It truly just is a once proud program. Shout out Joe once again. Shout out Joe. I know you're watching. I know you're listening. So, where do we go from here? Well, Maryland's basically just a must win. They're playing them in a week. They got to win that game. That's their final shot at getting some sort of signature out of conference game. We already know that the ACC is not very good. They just got their butts kicked by the SEC. So whatever you do in the conference is really not going to matter when it comes to making the tournament. His team ain't making the tournament, guys, but just for hypothetical purposes. So you got to beat Maryland. That's it. And if you don't beat Maryland, you're under 500. Tough one today, but we'll get over it. We'll move on. Syracuse loses to Georgetown 75-71 this afternoon. Thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. For your second listen, you can check out the Locked On ACC podcast. Alex Dono and Kenton Gibbs, they keep it real and bring you the truth about where your favorite ACC team stands within the conference. You can find Locked On ACC on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Folks, as far as what is coming up on the podcast in the future, as I have been saying for the last week or so, this channel is basically a football podcast unless there's a basketball game and I give a post-game reaction. So it's going to be basically football podcasts. Tomorrow, we're going to go back into the transfer portal, and we're not talking quarterbacks. So maybe it'll be a little bit more informative. Syracuse is looking at a couple of players in the portal on defense. They are looking at an edge rusher from Rhode Island, AJ Pena, and also they're looking for a defensive lineman, Chris Thomas from Marshall. So we're going to discuss those players in a full podcast tomorrow because Syracuse definitely needs help on the defensive end, or just defense in general in the portal. Could use a defensive end. Also, Kyle McCord, shout out to him. He was 10th in Heisman voting. You can make an argument that he should have been higher, but overall, I mean, they got the 4 finalists right. I'm not going to sit here and try to complain between who's 5 and who's 10, but regardless, maybe I'll make a 10-minute podcast about Kyle McCord, going over his season and the fact that he finished top 10 in Heisman voting, and maybe we can take a little bit of a deep dive into other Heisman finishes in the history of Syracuse football. So that's what's coming up on the Locked On Syracuse podcast. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this video, click that like button. If you really liked it, subscribe to the channel, turn on those notifications so you know right away when I am dropping the next podcast. And everyone, take care.